I am Jonnita Stanton. We have Reginald Perryman, Kashka Williams, and we are TSARE. This is the There's Something About Real Estate podcast where we talk all things real estate, and we have a special guest with us tonight, Mr. John Kashnowski.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here, and hopefully I can give you some insight on self-directed IRAs.
All right,
Wonderful. So, John, we like to always open up and get started with how did you get started in the business?
Well, I got started. I remember distinctly one day on a Saturday night, Sunday morning. I was watching TV, clicking through the channel. I woke up suddenly like 3 a.m. All of a sudden, I turned on the TV because that always makes me fall back to sleep. I happened to see an infomercial about investing in real estate, and that's how I got started. So I call it so I went to it hooked me. It sounded very interesting. So I went to what they called a TSARE seminar, which is a 2-day seminar. And then after that seminar, it was a 1-day seminar, just maybe a few hours. Then I went to the next seminar, which was a 2-day seminar, and I liked it. And then I joined an investment group where I really got started and got a lot of my education in real estate. But it all started from an infomercial when I couldn't fall asleep one day.
Wow.
Yeah.
How long ago was that?
That was back in 2010. I had retired from Ford in February 2010, and I attended my first real estate investment class. I think it was July of 2010.
Cool.
And I've been at it ever since.
Okay.
Cool.
That's interesting. I totally did not expect for you to say that.
That's exactly what happened. So basically, I got my education by being taught by gurus.
Mm.
Okay.
I won't mention the gurus, but they're famous gurus, guys you see on TV.
Right.
Okay.
And you got in at an interesting time. You said 2010,
Yeah.
so the market was depressed, so you were able to get some good deals.
Correct,
On some
but
properties.
I was also warned by other people, you're crazy, get in this market now. We're losing because so many people had lost money in the downturn.
Right.
And they thought it was crazy. I didn't know that much about real estate, so I didn't know about a downturn, quite honestly.
Right.
I didn't pay attention to that. I mean, I knew what's going on around me because I was a victim of being laid off from Ford Motor. You know, we had layoffs, plant closings, everything like that. So I knew there was a downturn, but I didn't realize how bad it was as far as affecting the real estate market and particularly investors who lost a ton of money.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you got in at the end of the last cycle,
Correct.
Yeah.
and in the beginning of this cycle.
The upturn. Yeah.
Correct. And if you follow cycles, I've been told, although I haven't done research on it, that real estate usually follows about a 17-year cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
So I thought it was 10 years.
no,
Well,
I believe it's
yeah.
17 years.
The average is about 10 years,
Okay.
but around 17. That's why we was talking about if you buy it and hold it long enough, it'll recover.
Always.
So you have your down cycle and up cycle.
So, what do you specialize in?
I specialize in, I specialize in 7 different things, be honest with you. But if I had to pinpoint what I specialize in now, I would say it's private lending and also buy and hold properties, rental properties,
Okay. So
probably.
I did
But
a
I
good
also
job.
did wholesaling. I'm a proof of funds provider. I actually act as a consultant, a transactional funding. I've done a lot of deals where I do transactional funding for people too. So I've done a little bit of everything.
So for those
I've done flips.
that don't know, can you explain the transactional funding?
Absolutely. Let's say I'm a wholesaler and I get a property under contract for $100,000. And let's say and I have a buyer that is going to pay me $120,000 for it. Now the challenge is, do I want that buyer to know that I'm going to make $20,000 on this deal?
Right.
He might be a little upset. So a lot of times you may use transactional funding, or let's say I don't even have the money. Then I would go to someone and say, hey, I got this property for $100,000. I'm going to sell it to this guy for $120,000. Would you loan me $100,000 and I'm going to give you some money so I can borrow your money for a day or two? So basically it's a double close. We're going to buy it we're going to buy it in the morning, sell it in the afternoon.
Right.
And I'm going to provide the money for you to make that happen.
Right.
So that's basically how transactional funding works. So as a transactional funder, obviously you're working with escrows. So typically the new buyer is going to put their money in escrow before the transactional funder is going to wire their money into escrow. That way we know that it's going to close. and usually as a transactional funder, it's all negotiable. So let's ask everybody out there: if you need $100,000 to make 20,000, how much would you be willing to share with me if I provide you the $100,000 for a day or two?
Right.
So it's all negotiable.
Cool.
Okay.
So that's another way for people to invest in real estate without being a fix and flipper or a rehabber. They can just loan the money and get paid on the money that they're loaning in such a
100%.
short period of time.
Yes.
That's got to be highly profitable.
Transactional funding is supposed to be a one-day deal, but I found it could usually go between 3 and 5 days, quite honestly. But still, to loan somebody $100,000 for 2 or 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, you can make pretty good rate of return. And then, of course, the borrower makes a huge profit.
Right.
Okay. So let's jump back to the self-directed IRAs. Can you explain that and how that works? So I guess it's going to be 2 parts. We're going to talk about what the self-directed IRA is and then how you use that to invest.
Great. Okay, basically a self-directed IRA, when I first started in real estate, that's what really hooked me when I learned at the seminar that you can self-direct your IRA money. Because I had worked at Ford, I had a 401k, I had substantial savings. Now, when I retired from Ford, I took the money out of the 401k and I transferred it to E-Trade because I was going to do stocks, bonds, mutual funds. Then when I saw this seminar and I realized about self-directed IRAs, I moved all my money from E-Trade and opened up a self-directed IRA account. Now, I did even further than that. I went further than that.
Right.
When you open up a self-directed IRA account, you got to go to a certain custodian that allows you to self-direct your IRA. But I also learned that your self-directed IRA can, and this is dangerous, can buy an LLC. So what I did with my self-directed IRA, I invested in an LLC. Well, what does that do? I bypass my custodian. Anytime you want to lend with your custodian, there's fees. $30, $70, $80. There's fees going out, fees coming back. However, if you have a self-directed IRA that owns an LLC, you have a checkbook. You can write your own checks. You can send a check or do a wire directly to the title company when you're lending to someone, or you could write a check out. It's called a checkbook control IRA. But it's really not advisable because if you screw up, the IRS is going to hammer you. So you got to be very, very, very
Right.
So what you mean by screw up? Give an example of screwing up.
Well, let's say you write a check to yourself. That would be a prohibited transaction. Let's say, you bought a property and you went over there and worked on that property. That's a prohibited transaction. Your IRA will get disqualified and you're going to be penalized big time.
So you have to hire third parties for everything.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. When you have here's the thing. It depends on what you're doing with your self-directed IRA. With my self-directed IRA, I use that company pretty much only as a lender.
Right.
So I only use it to lend to somebody else who's going to flip a house.
Okay.
So they want to flip a house. They need $50,000. I'll loan from that self-directed IRA to them to flip the house. Right. In return for that, I'm going to get a promissory note. I'm going to be listed on the insurance policy. Not me. When I say me, I mean my IRA.
Right.
And also a promissory note. A promissory note and a mortgage, and I'll be on the insurance policy. Right. Now, depending on where you're lending, if you're lending west of the Mississippi, usually those states are deed of trust states. They're not mortgage states. And Georgia is also not a mortgage state. So depending on what state you're lending in, your security might be different than a mortgage. It could be a deed of trust, and in Georgia has a different one, but I can't remember what it's called.
Okay.
So
I'm sorry. Explain a custodian.
A custodian basically is like your bank, but you don't get interest on your account. Basically, what they do is they allow you to put money in their, they act as your custodian, and there's fees involved, and they allow you to make transactions such as being a lender, or if you want to buy a property in your IRA, that's what they allow. So, but they're very difficult to work with You got to have all your I's dotted and T's crossed. It's not easy going through your custodian. And like I said, you have to submit all the paperwork to them first before they're going to allow you to make any transactions. So, like I said, there's paperwork involved.
Right.
But basically, they're protecting yourself from disqualifying yourself.
Okay.
So they're acting in your best interest. But like I said, there's, for instance, let's say you want to buy a house on an auction and you got to be at that auction right there today and you want to buy it in your IRA. So if I went through my custodial account, I have to submit paperwork. It might take 3-4 days to review and okay it. Well, the auction's over. But if you have checkbook control, you can bid on that property right now, write that check. Here, I bought that house.
Okay.
So
But I don't advise checkbook control unless you're 100% educated on the ins and outs of self-directed IRAs.
Okay. So even when you sell a property, let's say you own a property in your IRA, they have to approve all the documents for closing and everything. Is that correct?
You know, that's a great question. I never sold a property in my IRA yet.
Oh,
Because, like I said, I only use my IRA basically for as a lender.
okay.
But because my if it was in the name of the IRA, yes, you're 100%. They'd have to approve everything.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, when you use a self-directed IRA, there's a certain way you even have to title the mortgage and the promissory note.
Right.
It has to be something like there's a long title for it. Something like, let's say, I don't want to name any custodians, but it would be blank, blank, blank company custodian for benefit of John Doe IRA number 12345. So that's how it's titled. It's on your promissory note, it's on your mortgages, it's on all your documents. It has to be titled exactly that way. And I want to let you know another thing. I bought over 20 properties, rental properties. I did not use my IRA money, but you know what I did? I used my friend's IRA money. I borrowed from them.
Right.
And then I would pay them quarterly the interest that we agreed upon. And each time I would write them a check, I'd put blank, blank company custodian for benefit of blank, blank, blank. And that's how it had to be. And I sent it to the custodian, not to him.
Right.
Sent it to the custodian. They put it in his account.
So this money, so when you're getting paid in your IRA, it's going straight to the IRA. This is just part of your retirement. So any rents collected or anything like that goes straight to the IRA.
100%. You don't
Okay.
get any benefit of it. Now you're allowed to withdraw some of that money if you want, but that would be a distribution.
Right.
So there'd be a tax consequence unless it's in your Roth IRA. Of course, if it's in your Roth IRA, it's tax free. But still, you have to fill out paperwork. The IRS still wants to know, even if it's tax free, that you took money out of your self-directed IRA.
Right.
Now, here's another thing for me. Because my IRA is 100% IRA owned. My IRA owns the LLC, I mean.
Okay.
So if I wanted to take a distribution, I couldn't take a distribution I couldn't write my check from my LLC. I would have to go back to my custodian and they would have to approve a distribution from my LLC to me. In other words, if I just wrote a check to John Kashnowski, that'd be a prohibited transaction. It has to go back to the custodian first to take any distribution.
Wow.
So the prohibited. So you're saying. So what's the penalty of a prohibited distribution?
Well, that's a good question. And I used to know it off the top of my head. I should have prepared better.
No.
But I think the penalty for prohibited transaction is about 20 to 25%. Let's say it's 20%. You'll have to look that up. So let's say you you did a transaction that's worth $100,000. Now you get penalized 20 or 25%. Let's say it's 20%. Now you're down to $80,000, and now you got to pay taxes on that right now. And there's even a bigger penalty than that. In other words, you cash out your IRA, you don't own it anymore. You got to pay taxes on it now. You lose the benefit of your IRA for doing a prohibited transaction. Wow. One prohibited transaction, for instance, let's say you bought a rental property in your IRA. And let's say the landlord called you up and says, my dishwasher broke or my lawn needs cutting, and you went over there and you cut the lawn or you repaired a dishwasher, that's prohibited. You can't work on any property your IRA owns. If you got caught, you're in deep trouble. They're going to disqualify your IRA. It's not worth it.
Wow.
That's why, to me, I only use my IRA money as a lender.
Right.
I'm not going to do any work. They got their own contractors. I'm hands off 100%,
Right.
only as a lender.
So what I'm hearing is,
But by the way,
okay.
I'm sorry for
no
interrupting.
problem.
A lot of people don't know with your self-directed IRA, you could
Right.
buy pretty much everything with your IRA. You could buy a Wendy's hamburger shop. You could buy a hair salon owned by your IRA. You could use that IRA in so many oil change shop, whatever you want to do. But the only thing is you can't work at it.
Wow.
You can't manage it. You can't have anything to do with it. It has to be 100% hands off. What you cannot buy is anything that might benefit you. For instance, your IRA cannot invest in art collection, car collection, baseball cards, wine collection, or insurance policies. Why? Because you would get a benefit. Remember I
Right.
said it has to be hands off? You cannot get a benefit. So if I bought art collection, wow, I'm enjoying that. You can't enjoy something your IRA bought. Illegal.
Right. So it sounds like what I'm hearing is because you said pretty much you're not touching this money. You're just investing it and it's stockpiling until you retire. And you're also becoming a bank because you mentioned that you borrow money from your friend's IRA to buy your properties. And they do the same with you? Is that how it works?
Well, not really. Most of the money I borrowed from my friends, I've never lent back to them. They're also lenders like me. So
Okay.
they're looking for lending opportunities and rather than borrowing opportunities. But obviously, if they wanted to, I would be happy to lend to them also.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So, in terms
But you got to be
of-
careful of that too, by the way.
Right.
That's kind of a gray area. And let me explain that. Let's say one of my friends loaned to me from her IRA $30,000. And then she asked me to loan back to her $20,000. That might be a gray area because the IRS might say, wait a minute here, you're getting a benefit of that.
Right.
You're getting 30 from her, but you're loaning back 20 to her. That might be a gray area where they might do some scrutiny and saying, are you benefiting from that? Because remember, you can't benefit from this.
Right.
And the other thing you can't do is with your IRA, let's say you want to buy a vacation property. Great. So I buy a property in Florida and, I want to use that property. I can't. I can't go down there and stay in Florida and in my IRA property. Neither can my children, my mom, my dad, my grandparents, cousins, possibly. I could possibly let my cousins stay there, but I wouldn't even go that way. I would completely rent it only to strangers. I wouldn't even take a chance renting it to friends. But like I said, all that income coming back in would go back into the IRA.
Right.
But you cannot use it. Even for one day, you couldn't use it. That would be a prohibited transaction.
Okay.
Okay.
So I have a question. In terms of how much you earn on your dollar when it's sitting doing nothing in your IRA, how much does that typically, on average, increase when someone takes that as a lender and loans it to someone?
Well, if it's sitting in your account, you get zero interest on it. Let's say it's in your custodial account, depending on your IRA custodian, they don't pay interest on that money. So let's say you got $100,000 in that account, you're not making a penny. The only way you make money is if you invest it. Now, as an investment, as a lender, it's all negotiable on how much you can make. For instance, on my rental properties, when I wanted to buy rental properties, and I had a guy that was willing to hold the note for me for numerous years, I paid him 10% annually, and I paid him quarterly. And guess what? I didn't even care because let's say I borrowed $30,000. Let's say I bought a property for $30,000. I paid him, and it cost me $10,000 to fix up. So I'm all in for 40. I got 10,000 in it. He's got 30 in it. Okay, great. Now, let's say I'm renting that property for $800. So I'm bringing in $9,600 a year, 12 times 800. And then I pay him 10% on his 30, which is $3,000. That brings me down to $6,600. And I got about $1,600 worth of taxes and insurance on that property.
44.
So how much am I left?
4,400. 4,400.
So I'm left with like $4,400 on my initial $10,000 investment.
So
and
in
then-
2.5 years.
And then what I do is I all that money goes back in the IRA, and then when I accumulate enough, I pay it off. So pretty much I paid off all but one property right now. All my other ones will be free and clear except one.
So that's
$10,000.
10 years, 20 properties, 19 paid off.
No, actually, what happened is I didn't start investing in rental properties about 4 years ago.
Okay. Even
So
better.
I bought all these properties in the last 4 years, pretty much.
So you started off initially investing and loaning money with your IRA.
Right, mostly lending.
Okay.
Mostly
All right.
lending. And then I started buying rental properties and borrowing money from people who had IRA money
Okay.
and then paying them off as I go. So I never took a dime out of my, the only money I ever paid myself out of my rental properties was my mileage at the end of the year.
Okay.
So rather than deduct gas mileage and this and that, take a deduction, you're allowed to pay you can do one or the other. So I take the mileage, and it was like pay yourself like 57 cents a mile, something like that.
Right.
And then I write that check at the end of the year for how many miles I went back and forth to the rentals or working on the rentals. And don't forget, these rentals are outside of my IRA, so I am allowed to work on them, manage them, everything like that.
Right. Because you just borrowed the money for those
Correct.
from someone else's
Correct.
IRA.
I borrowed the money from their
Right.
IRA,
Right.
so they can't help me with anything,
Right.
but that's fine. So.
So it sounds like, so for our listeners, what I'm hearing is that basically you have to treat the IRA like a business entity itself that you can't do anything in, you can't work in. And like some of us don't want to work in our business. We want it to run itself. And this is like the best way to do it.
That's correct.
Right.
And
Okay.
I would recommend for everybody just go right through their custodian. There may be more fees, but then
Right.
they're not going to let you do anything prohibited. They're going to warn you, of course,
Right.
but it's like a safety check for you. Unless you really, really do your research and are knowledgeable. As a matter of fact, a lot of IRA custodians now will not allow you to have checkbook control anymore.
Oh, wow.
They want to have control over you
Right.
because they know that there's a lot of dummies out there.
Right. That's true.
So, we were talking about if the money doesn't get paid back to a person's IRA. So you borrow money from your friend from their IRA, but then you don't pay it back, and they can't pay it back.
Well, I've had that happen to me. Have to foreclose. My IRA
Right.
foreclosed on them.
Okay.
Take them to court. So my IRA pays the attorney. My IRA pays all the expenses involved, legal expenses, comes from my IRA. None of it can come from my personal pocket. None of it. 100%. Anything involved in that litigation comes from the IRA.
Okay.
What if you don't have
I
the money? in there?
actually had that happen to me. I got a property in a town called Carbondale, Pennsylvania right now that the girl defaulted, and my IRA owns that property in Carbondale, long ways away. Nice property. And it's tenant occupied at $800 a month. But because of the distance involved, I'm thinking about selling it to another investor who wants cash flowing property.
What if you don't have any more money in that IRA to pay those expenses?
Well, you can borrow against your IRA, but it has to be what they call a non-recourse loan. Non-recourse means you can't personally guarantee that loan. The only security would be the property itself. And usually the criteria on a non-recourse loan, they don't loan as much loan to value as a traditional loan because it's non-recourse. There are some non-recourse lenders out there, not a ton of them. So it might be a little difficult to find somebody to do a non-recourse loan. In other words, loaning to your IRA. Now, if you also borrow from, if your IRA is borrowing money, there is a tax consequence too. So you have to be careful about that. In other words, most of the time your IRA doesn't have to pay taxes. There is no
Right.
tax consequence until you cash it out. But if you're using debt to support your IRA, there will be some tax consequences. And here's the other thing, by the way, try to find an accountant who knows anything about that. Most accountants don't even know about self-directed IRAs.
Right.
Most bankers don't know about self-directed IRAs. I've educated bankers about self-directed IRAs because they had no idea what a self-directed IRA is.
So
Wait. I'm sorry.
I got it.
Wait. I'm sorry. So in the middle of the night, while you were like sleeping and was woken up by this infomercial, they were talking about self-directed IRAs, or were they just saying, "Come to this workshop"?
They said, come to the workshop and we'll show you how you can use your IRA to invest in real estate. We'll show you how to do this.
Okay. I just wanted to be clear.
I'm not sure they said about the IRA, but at the workshop, they did bring that up.
Okay.
And that lit a light bulb on me because, like I said, I was going to do stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. And instead, I decided, I like this real estate game.
No, it's wonderful to me because I very rarely sleep with the television on anyways, but when I do, sometimes I get woke up by an infomercial, and normally it's like to buy a Kirby, or to spend money, something that you're not going to use, but you were convinced like in your sleep, like, oh, this is a good idea. So you're laying there in the dark, like charging your credit card, but instead...
Well, I didn't charge my credit card because it was free. The first, what you call a teaser seminars, they're free. So you go to the seminar and that's when they hook you in. And I liked it so much, I took my wife the next day to it. I see if she liked it, and she liked it too. But she doesn't have the same passion I have for it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing I learned at the seminar. Our instructor said, the guy who taught the seminar, I'm not going to say his name, and I'll never forget, and it made sense to me. He said, number one, if you want to be successful in real estate or anything else, you have to have passion. You have to like what you're doing. And you have to think about it all the time, and it has to be part of, your everyday life. He said, number two, you have to have continuous education. Just like doctors, medicine changes all the time. Just like laws change for an attorney. As a real estate investor, you got to stay continually educated because things change, markets change, everything changes. And number three thing he said, you have to take action now. That is the stumbling block by most investors. They think they want to get in the game and they're afraid to dive in. They don't jump in the pool and get involved. So I took that to heart. So when I went to my seminar, it was actually in California, the boot camp, but not bragging. So I went to a boot camp in California. Then I went to another one, which is called a buy and hold tour by a different guru in Indianapolis. That was in early September 10, 2010, and then September 25, 2010. When I got back, I think it was October 7, I did 2 deals on that day as a lender. And before the end of that year, I invested in 5 properties before December 31st, including closing on one.
Right.
Because the guy I loaned money to, we already had a buyer for it before we bought it. Took about 35 days to close it. But I took action. I did. Right off the bat, I took action.
Now, let me ask you this. So with the custodian, do you have to have a minimum balance before you go to a custodian with your IRA?
Boy, that's a good question. I believe there is a minimum that you have to open your account with.
Okay.
I'm not sure what it is, but because I had substantial, way more than the minimum necessary, but I'm not sure what the minimum is.
Right.
5,000. It could be, and that might change per custodian. And usually they have a fee to open an account for you. All you got to do is tell them, could you do it for free? And most of the times they will. Can you waive your fee? Now that's another thing. If you don't ask, you're not going to get.
Right.
What's it going to hurt? You don't want to waive your fee? Well, I might call this other custodian.
Right.
And basically, it's all about fees too, because there are annual fees, and every transaction you do, there's a fee with a custodian. Right. Now, I'm going to tell you a little insight on mine. To hold my account open with my LLCs, IRA-owned LLCs, cost me $295 a year. Most people who have IRAs, they spend 3-4 times that just in fees in a year.
Right.
That's the benefit of having checkbook control. The fees, there's virtually no fees except an annual fee. You don't have any of these nickel and dime fees.
Right.
But it may not be worth it if you're not an expert.
I would not advise it to anybody because any attorney's going to tell you you're nuts for taking that chance.
Yeah.
Let me. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you. So you mentioned that you were going to go put your money in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. In your so comparing the two, did you ever put any of the money into stocks, bonds, or mutual funds, and how did it compare?
Well, quite honestly, when I was at Ford, I had my 401k. It was all in mutual funds.
Okay.
So I did do very well in mutual funds. And at that time, we had probably about 50 choices that you could choose from. And I did pretty good. I made some good money.
Right.
But like I said, since then, no, I've been pretty much all in real estate.
Okay.
Stocks, bonds, and mutual funds is great, but you have to know what you're doing. You have to do a lot of research, just like everything. And did I have the passion for it? I actually was going to go to the online academy and learn all about it. I went to their teaser seminar, and it's pretty impressive. But I decided, you know what? I'm going to stick with real estate. It's more of a people business than sitting there watching charts all day.
Right.
But it's all, quite honestly, in real estate, it's not all about making money. It's a people business. It's meeting people. It's a relationship business. Stock, bonds, and mutual funds, you can get rich, but it's kind of cold.
Right.
But
Definitely.
Yeah.
I got a question. So explain to our listeners, how do you get money, or the best way, or how do you get money into your self-directed IRA? How do you get started?
Well, you have to open up an account, and you're allowed to put X amount of dollars in your IRA each year. I believe I haven't made a contribution to my IRA in years. For one, I'm 67. Why do I want to contribute more? I should be starting to take out. But it used to be, I think the max you could put in was like $5,500 a year, and then it went up higher to, depending if you're over 50 or not. The limit that you can invest is higher. But here's an example. Let's say you only had another way you could turn some good money. Let's say you only had $5,000 in your IRA, or even $1,000 in your IRA, and you want to increase that substantially. You could do a lease option on that property, or you could get a wholesale deal under contract, and and put it in the name of your IRA. And then even if you use transactional funding, there's going to be a tax consequence. But remember, I gave you that example earlier where you can make $18,000. So let's say you did that in your IRA. Let's say you put $1,000 EMD down. Now it's in the name of the IRA, the property. You borrow the rest from someone like me, and then that money your profit would go back in your IRA. So all of a sudden, your $1,000 EMD, you make another $18,000. You can increase it substantially. Same thing. You can also do the same on a lease option deal.
Give that example again. It went over a lot of people's heads. So give that example with the $5,000 in your
the 1,000. Let's do it with
the
a lot of
1,000.
people.
Okay,
only
well
have
let's say in this example, let's say I got I found a good wholesale deal. So a seller wants to sell me a house for $100,000. I know the house is worth $120,000. So now I go and I talk to the seller. Rather than putting it in my name, I put it in the name of the IRA, the contract. Now the contract is his name. Now you can assign that contract also. So if you want, if your buyer has no issue with spending $120,000, you don't need a transactional funder like me. He's good. Okay, great. I put $1,000 in the deal. It's in the name of my IRA. I sold it for $120,000. All that money, profit, goes back into the IRA. So you can increase the value of your IRA substantially if you wanted to. Now, in that same example, let's say you didn't want your buyer to know that you're making $20,000 on the deal. Then you could borrow from someone like me, a transactional funder, pay me a fee, and then the rest of the money would go back in your IRA because because you're buying it in your IRA.
So he's talking about earnest money deposit is the EMD is worth $1,000.
Correct, basically.
But ultimately, it sounds like.
But you still have to make sure on the purchase agreement it's in the name of your IRA. You can't change it later. It has to be in the name of your IRA.
So basically, what he's saying is, for someone that has $1,000, that instead of putting it in an online account and investing in stocks, you can invest that $1,000 into maybe like a wholesale deal or whatever. And you
If
can,
you have a self-directed IRA, you have to have
Right.
an account established first.
right, and you turn that 1,000 into possibly 18,000 or whatever. That's a better return that you can get in a shorter period of time, and you can increase your retirement account by a lot compared to just putting it in a mutual fund for a year or so.
Absolutely. And my advice, if you're doing that, also open up a Roth self-directed IRA. That way
Okay.
there's no tax consequence when down the road when you withdraw it. It all grows tax-free.
Right.
But you use there's no tax benefit to you when you open the account. Whereas if you open a traditional self-directed IRA, you get a tax benefit. You can deduct the amount you open the account with, say $1,000, you can deduct that from your gross income
Right.
and you get a tax break. But to me, I would just use after tax dollars and then it's all tax free.
Right.
But yeah, you can do that. That's a good way to increase the value of your IRA rather quickly.
Right. So it also sounds like for people that are good at making money in real estate, but they're also good at blowing it all, this is a way to kind of protect yourself from yourself because you're creating your retirement based on your current activities that most of us are already doing anyway. You're just doing it through your self-directed IRA, and you got a huge nest egg at retirement.
So that's huge for a lot of people that's in real estate because they're always wondering, what am I doing for my retirement?
Right.
So this is a
Yes.
perfect opportunity for them to put some money away for their retirement.
Absolutely. Perfect
Right.
opportunity. I just don't know how much the minimum amount you'd have to open an account with. You'd have to call different custodians and find out.
Right.
And I know of at least 8 custodians in America, if not more, because I've been on their webinars.
Right.
And you can get great education. Just go to their website. They got a library of webinars. You can watch these webinars and learn all about the ins and outs of self-directed IRA. I highly advise that.
And most of this information is free.
Absolutely free.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely free. I used to
Wow.
go on live webinars, which was great because we had questions and answers.
Right.
And I used to ask some tough questions. And they,
Right.
sometime I'd stump the experts. And sometimes, I hate to say it, when I was sharp, which I'm not sharp anymore, I knew the answers more than they did.
Wow.
For instance, here's a ninja strategy or a gray area, let's say.
Ninja strategy.
Am I going to advise this? Am I going to advise this? No. Did I ever do this ninja strategy? Well, I don't really want to say if I did or not, but I wouldn't know about it. But anyway, there's a way in your IRA that you're allowed to withdraw money from your IRA for 60 days as long as you return it in 60 days. Okay? If you do not return it, you get penalized. But you have 60 days once a year, once 12 months to take money out of your account, use it for whatever you want, make sure you put the money back in. So let's say I got a lot of money in my IRA, but I don't have much money in my hip pocket. All right. How about if I take out $50,000 from my IRA and I loaned it on one of these transactional funding deals? Now it's no longer in my IRA. Withdrew it from my IRA. $50,000.
Right.
I loan it to Jonnita for transactional funding. She's got a property under contract for $50,000. She's going to sell it for $65,000. Okay?
Right.
Loan it to her for 2 or 3 days. She agrees with me to give me $3,000 for $50,000 for 3 days.
Right.
She sells it for $65,000. She makes $12,000 on the deal. I make $3,000 on the deal.
Right.
But it goes in my hip pocket because remember, I took it out of the IRA. Then I take the 50. I take that 53. 3,000 goes in my hip pocket. 50 goes back into my IRA.
Ninja strategy.
That's a rewinder. You got to rewind that back.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yep.
Now, obviously, you can even do a bit bigger deal than that. Let's say you did a $100,000 deal, and let's say you did a wholesale deal on your own.
Right.
Let's say you knew a property that I could get under contract for, instead of her getting it under contract, I get it under contract. And I know about the deal. I withdraw the money from my IRA for 60 days, get it under contract for $50,000. I know I got a buyer over here for $65,000. I'm going to close with him within 10 days or a week or 2 weeks.
Right.
Close with him. I just walk away with $15,000. He pays me $65,000. I walk away with $15,000. and then I put the 50 back in.
I have something to
Right.
say because when people are watching
Be
this,
careful, that's ninja.
no.
Remember, the
I
IRS
understand, but
consider
listen.
you getting a benefit of that.
Right.
people are going to watch this and listen to it and say, "Oh, that's not good math because there's no way that you make the 15,000."
Yeah, there's closing costs involved.
However, you can avoid closing costs and still make your entire 15. Like, I just want to say that because people are going to watch it and evaluate it. And
These
say,
are just
Well,
examples, but
yeah.
yeah, there's usually closing costs and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
But even with
These are
that,
just
when
rough
you-
examples.
But in those types of transactions, sometimes the you can include those costs on the other side as well, so you do make your entire 15.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
And another example would be, let's say I had a major repair I wanted to do on my house. So let's say I had some money in my IRA. Let's say I had $50,000 in my IRA. So now I want to repair my house and it's going to cost $30,000. So I can take that $50,000 out of my IRA. Now I can repair my house. How am I going to get the other money back? How am I going to get that 50 back in the IRA? I'm sorry, the 30 back. Well, I had a property that I loaned to Jonnita on, and it's supposed to close next week. And I'll be darned if, I'm going to get $35,000 back because I loaned her X amount of dollars. So when that property sells, I could put that money back into the IRA.
But it's got to happen
As
in the
long as
60
it has
days.
to happen within 60 days.
Now, what if it doesn't happen in the 60 days?
You get penalized.
the
you're
same
gonna-
20% or prohibited?
It's not a prohibited transaction, but I'm not sure how much you get penalized.
Gotcha.
But there is very dire consequences. So don't do the strategy unless you got a sure.
That's why I said
And
ninja
you know
strategy.
the penalties and things, so you have to
Exactly.
be educated.
Yep.
Let's get another ninja strategy, please.
Well, I think that's enough for today.
Yeah,
One more.
got
one.
Three's a charm.
well,
Well, how many did I do already?
Two.
It's a lot of gems in there though.
Yeah.
Because like just for the average
They always
person,
stopping people.
all of this stuff is new, and I think like just using $1,000 and turning it to possibly 18, right?
Great.
All legit, all above the board, and you're creating. A
Well, don't forget, I
retirement
said
account.
you could in that example, there will be a tax consequence because you borrowed money, though.
Right.
So keep that in mind. Anytime your IRA borrows money, there will be a tax consequence.
Right.
Unless you had that Roth.
Still going to be a tax consequence because anytime, whether it's a Roth or traditional, if that IRA is borrowing money, you're using someone else's money to make money on your Roth, because otherwise, businesses would be at a disadvantage.
Gotcha.
Let's say
Right.
I got a Wendy's, and you got a Wendy's. You got to pay taxes on all your earnings on your Wendy's, but my IRA owned my Wendy's. It would be a competitive advantage. So you have to pay taxes. There's consequences with business taxes.
So who do we go to? We don't have any CPAs that know about this.
There are some good
That's right.
CPAs out there who know about that, but I try to avoid. I haven't had an instant yet where I had to borrow money from my IRA. Number one, for the benefit of my IRA, and I've only loaned strictly as a lender,
Yep.
so I've never ran into that problem.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Hold on. He was giving us one. He's going to give us one more
Yeah,
ninja.
a ninja strategy.
One more. Gray
I love
area.
it.
Well,
That's why we here.
I guess my ninja strategies are about people who have more IRA money than hip pocket money. So, like I just said in that example, where you can withdraw that money and use it for your personal benefit as long as it's back within 60 days. Another strategy might be that, let's say Shaka had $50,000 in his IRA. I had $50,000 in my IRA. And Jonnita had $50,000 in her IRA. So another strategy might be, geez, you know what?
Go ahead. You
I don't have any hip pocket money. So let's say she said something like, well, your IRA could loan my IRA could loan your IRA could loan your IRA. But like I said, that might be considered a
Right.
Benefit.
benefit, getting a benefit. So you
Right.
got to be careful on that.
Okay.
But is the IRS going to catch you? I don't know. I don't know how busy you are.
They're gonna get busy now.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, I
how,
heard that.
how many times do we go a little bit faster on the highway than we're supposed to? Do you get caught by the cops? Every so
Yeah.
often you do.
I don't even know, Shaka.
Right.
Well, I think overall this information was helpful. I mean,
Oh,
the
yeah,
average person is
absolutely.
gonna be, some of it's gonna be over your head, but you just have to subscribe, like, and rewind.
Because what we're gonna do with John though, the next time John comes in, actually when we do a live, let's
Yeah.
try to get John in. And then what we'll do, we'll have a whiteboard and we'll do a lot of scenarios.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
John, he does a lot of
Oh yeah, I'd love to do that. I could show
Yeah.
you. I could show you some live examples of what I've done, and I could show you examples of how I borrowed money from other people's IRA and how they made money
Right.
as me being a borrower, and I could show you examples how I made money as a lender.
Great.
Mhm.
It is.
When I say me, I mean my IRA.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Now you mentioned, do you consult with people as well? Like if someone came to you and said, "I have this money, I want to do what you're doing. Can you help me out?" In other words.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I do help people find deals, pretty much,
Okay.
and I help people who have deals find funding for their deals.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Basically, as a consultant, yes,
Mm-hmm.
So you help
Uh,
find the money and you help find the deal.
correct.
Okay. Great.
What's next? What are you? Do you have? I mean, is this where you are and you're kind of like, I like it here, it's comfortable, or are you going to be doing anything? You know, like, have you learned anything new? Or are you going to be like changing some of your strategies?
What's next for me is I enjoy what I'm doing now. I like the inventory I have. I have an opportunity possibly to buy some more houses. I'm out of state that I'm looking into from a borrower, a lender, I mean, friend of mine that wants to cash out. I'm looking into that. So I'm always looking for good deals.
Mhm.
Right now, I find it a real challenge to find any good deals. Anytime I
Yeah.
offer on a house, I'm offering over asking, and someone's with an escalation clause, which means whatever they're asking, whatever someone else bids, I'll bid another 1,000 on it, up
Right.
to X amount of dollars. And even with that escalation clause, I'm not getting any properties right now.
Mhm.
Right.
And I'm specific in my area. I like Macomb County because I know
Mhm.
Macomb County.
Right.
But I loan all over. I loan nationwide, everywhere. I probably loaned seriously in at least 30 states.
Wow.
So, but those deals are long done. You know, that was
Right.
a long time ago. But right now, I'm concentrating more on the local market.
Okay.
Okay.
And quite honestly, I have a problem property in Roland, North Carolina that I had to take back. It's non-IRA, so I got to go back and go down there and clean that property up.
Mm.
So,
Right.
North Carolina.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Well, John, we appreciate you for coming here and chatting with us today and sharing all of your knowledge. We hope to have you back.
great. Well, listen, thank you. It was a lot of fun today.
All
I enjoyed
right.
myself.
Appreciate you.
I
Learned
just
a
wish
lot.
I be honest with you, I wasn't sure what this interview was going to be. If I would have known it was going to be all on self-directed IRAs, I would have sharpened up a little bit more.
Oh, we
Well,
learned a
it
lot.
was all
I thought it
right.
was going to be more about lending than self-directed IRAs, but that's fine.
That's what when you come on next time, that's what
Yeah.
we'll talk about.
Okay, sounds
Mhm.
good.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed myself.
All
Appreciate
right.
you.
Thanks a lot.
So, look, we are sorry. Please like, subscribe, follow us. We are on YouTube and we're Spotify, Apple Music.
Podcasts. Yep. Everywhere.
Yes, Apple. So there's a difference there. We learned that at the picnic, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
So
But-
the purple icon, Apple Podcast, go there,
Right.
follow. Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.